The night the Rhine was crossed did not begin with a thunderclap. It began quietly, almost politely, as if history itself was holding its breath. On the evening of March 22, 1945, while most German commanders believed the river would hold for days, maybe weeks, George S. Patton was already moving. No massive announcement, no dramatic pause, just boats sliding into dark water, engines muffled, orders whispered, and a decision that would shatter the last great natural barrier of Nazi Germany. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. What happened in the next few hours would leave Adolf Hitler stunned, furious, and scrambling for words as tens of thousands of German soldiers vanished into captivity almost overnight. By early 1945, the war in Europe had reached its breaking point. Germany was bleeding on all fronts. In the east, the Red Army was grinding forward through Poland, closing on Berlin with relentless force. In the west, Allied armies stood on the edge of the Rhine River, the final defensive line before the German heartland. For months, German propaganda had promised that the Rhine would be a wall of steel and water, a barrier no enemy could cross easily. Hitler believed it. Many of his generals said it publicly, even if they no longer believed it privately. But one American general never intended to give the Rhine time to become a symbol. His name was George Smith Patton, Jr., commander of the United States Third Army. Patton was not waiting for permission from history. He had already raced across France after the Normandy breakout, pushed through Lorraine, and fought his way to the German border. He was aggressive, impatient, and deeply competitive. By March 1945, Patton was frustrated that other Allied commanders were being praised for capturing bridges and planning major crossings. He wanted his own crossing, on his own terms, and he wanted it fast. When intelligence reports suggested that German defences near the town of Oppenheim, south of Mayence, were weak, Patton did not hesitate. He chose the date, he chose the place, and he chose to move before the enemy could react. The Rhine at Oppenheim was wide, cold, and fast-moving. German units assigned to defend it were understrength, poorly supplied, and exhausted. Many were made up of older men, young boys, or soldiers pulled from shattered divisions. Heavy weapons were scarce. Anti-tank guns were limited. Artillery ammunition was running low. German commanders expected an Allied crossing eventually, but they believed it would come after days of heavy bombing and artillery fire. They believed they would see it coming. That belief would cost them dearly. On the night of March 22nd, at approximately 10 p.m., elements of the U.S. 5th Infantry Division began crossing the Rhine in assault boats. There was no massive artillery barrage to warn the defenders. Instead, Patton relied on speed, surprise, and darkness. American engineers quietly ferried infantry across the river. German sentries, confused and disorganized, offered only scattered resistance. Within hours, American troops had secured a bridgehead on the eastern bank. By dawn on March 23rd, Patton had done what Hitler believed was still days away. The Rhine had been crossed. As the sun rose over the river, American engineers began constructing pontoon bridges at a remarkable pace. Trucks, tanks, artillery pieces, and entire divisions poured across the water. Patton did not pause. He did not wait to consolidate. He pushed forward immediately, driving deep into Germany before German command structures could respond. Towns fell one after another. Road junctions were seized. German units, cut off from communications and supply, began to collapse. The speed of the advance created chaos among German defenders. Units that expected to fight at the river suddenly found themselves attacked from behind. Orders did not arrive. Radios failed. Officers disappeared. In many cases, German soldiers woke up to find American tanks already on the roads behind them. Resistance often lasted minutes, sometimes seconds. Entire battalions surrendered without firing a shot. By the end of March 23rd, thousands of German soldiers had been captured. In the days that followed, that number would climb rapidly. reaching into the tens of thousands as encirclements closed and organized defense simply ceased. In Berlin, the news arrived like a hammer blow. Adolf Hitler had built much of his remaining strategy around the idea that the Rhine would buy time. Time to reorganize, time to move reserves, time to split the Allies or force a negotiated peace. The reports from Oppenheim destroyed that illusion. The river had been crossed not after weeks of preparation, but almost casually in a single night. Worse still, it was Patton who had done it, a General Hitler personally despised and feared for his unpredictability. Inside the Führerbunker, Hitler reacted not with calm analysis, but with rage. He demanded explanations. He blamed local commanders for cowardice and betrayal. He insisted that the crossing must be a limited action, a probing attack that could still be thrown back. Orders went out for immediate counterattacks, despite the fact that the units required to carry them out barely existed. Divisions were moved on paper that had no real soldiers behind them. Hitler's words, as recorded by those around him, showed a man increasingly detached from the reality on the ground. The German High Command knew the truth. The Rhine line was broken, not cracked, not bent, but shattered. Patton's Third Army was pouring into central Germany, threatening Frankfurt, Kassel, and beyond. The idea of mounting a coordinated defense was becoming impossible. Rail lines were destroyed. Fuel was scarce. Air superiority belonged completely to the Allies. Any movement by day was punished from the air. German generals tried to explain this to Hitler, but he refused to listen. He insisted that willpower could replace divisions, that loyalty could replace fuel, and that orders could replace reality. As Patton advanced, the scale of the collapse became clear. Prisoners came in by the thousands. Makeshift cages overflowed. American military police struggled to process the sheer number of captives. Many German soldiers were relieved to be captured. They had been fighting without hope, without supplies, and without clear orders for months. The crossing of the Rhine convinced many that the war was truly lost. Surrender was no longer shameful. It was survival. The figure of 50,000 German soldiers captured did not come from a single dramatic moment, but from the rapid chain reaction that Patton's crossing unleashed. Within a very short time, entire German formations east of the Rhine were isolated and destroyed as fighting units. The speed of the American advance meant that retreat routes were cut before they could be used. Bridges were seized intact. Roads were blocked by armour. Communication centres were overrun. At them, commanders found themselves surrounded with no realistic option except surrender. Hitler's response grew more extreme as the days passed. He accused his generals of treason. He issued orders forbidding retreat under any circumstances. He demanded that cities be held to the last man, even as they were bypassed or surrounded. He spoke of miracle weapons and last-minute reversals, clinging to fantasies while the map of Germany shrank by the hour. The crossing of the Rhine was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological one. It proved that no natural barrier, no symbolic line, could stop the Allies now. Patton, meanwhile, barely slowed down. He famously remarked to his staff that he had crossed the Rhine without even knowing it would be such a big deal. To him, it was simply the next obstacle. His focus was always forward. He drove his army hard, sometimes dangerously so, but the results were undeniable. Cities like Frankfurt fell quickly. German resistance crumbled wherever. Speed and surprise were applied. The Third Army became a machine that seemed impossible to stop. Behind the front lines, German civilians felt the impact as well. Refugees clogged the roads. Local officials fled or surrendered. The authority of the Nazi state evaporated in many areas almost overnight. What had been presented as an unbreakable defence turned out to be little more than a line on a map. The Rhine, once a source of confidence, became a symbol of failure. Within Hitler's inner circle, the crossing intensified existing tensions. Some officers quietly acknowledged that the war was lost. Others still believed in Hitler's vision, or at least pretended to. The atmosphere in Berlin grew darker and more desperate. Hitler's health declined. His decision-making became more erratic. The loss of the Rhine stripped away one of the last arguments that Germany could still defend its core territory. The reality on the ground was brutal and clear. The Allies were inside Germany, in force, not in small bridgeheads, but with entire armies. Supply lines flowed smoothly across newly built bridges. Airfields were captured and put into use within days. The industrial heart of Germany was exposed. There would be no pause, no regrouping, no second line strong enough to replace the Rhine. For Patton, the crossing was a personal triumph, but he never treated it as an ending. It was a beginning. He pushed toward the heart of Germany, aiming to destroy enemy forces wherever he found them. His aggressive tactics were not always popular with other Allied commanders, but in those critical days they produced results that even his critics could not deny. By early April 1945, the consequences of that single night at Oppenheim were fully visible. German armies in the West were fragmented and demoralized. Tens of thousands of soldiers were prisoners. The Ruhr pocket would soon close, capturing even more. Hitler's orders grew increasingly disconnected from reality. He spoke of counter-offensives that no longer existed outside his imagination. When historians later examined what Hitler said and did after Patton crossed the Rhine, a clear pattern emerged. There was no moment of clear acceptance, no admission of defeat. Instead, there was anger, denial, and blame. Hitler could not bring himself to acknowledge that the war was effectively lost. The Rhine crossing forced that truth into the open, but he refused to see it. The capture of so many German soldiers in such a short time was not just a result of American strength. It was the result of German exhaustion, strategic failure, and a leadership that could no longer adapt. Patton exploited every weakness. He moved faster than German command could think. He attacked where defences were thin and kept attacking before the enemy could recover. In the final weeks of the war, as Allied armies closed in from all directions, the crossing of the Rhine stood out as one of the decisive moments. It marked the end of any realistic German hope of holding the West. It exposed the emptiness of Hitler's promises, and it showed what modern, mobile warfare could achieve when led with speed, confidence, and relentless pressure. By the time Berlin fell in May 1945, the events of March seemed almost distant, yet they were directly connected. The night Patton crossed the Rhine was the night the last illusion of safety disappeared. It was the night when a river that had defined German confidence for generations failed in hours. And it was the moment when Adolf Hitler, confronted with undeniable reality, chose fantasy over facts. History often focuses on the dramatic endings, the final battles, and the famous last days. But sometimes the real turning points happen quietly, under cover of darkness, when one decision changes everything. On March 22, 1945, at Oppenheim on the Rhine, George S. Patton made such a decision. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, the fate of Nazi Germany was sealed. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.